What would you do if you went from living on the streets to winning $50 million overnight? For Peter Grayson, the answer wasn't what anyone expected. By the time he reached the end of his story, you won't believe what he did and who he did it to. The snow blanketed the streets of New York City in relentless layers as pedestrians hurried past, their heads bowed against the biting wind. On the sidewalk, huddled under a filthy blanket, sat Peter Grayson, a man who had once been a civil engineer but was now just another invisible figure among the city's countless homeless. Peter had fallen from grace after a series of devastating events, a corrupt company that embezzled funds, leaving him jobless, and a divorce that stripped him of not only his home, but also custody of his 8-year-old daughter, Emily. Since then, he had drifted between shelters and street corners, carrying only a worn-out backpack and a treasured photo of his daughter. Across the city, the story's antagonist, Gerald Hawkins, flaunted his wealth shamelessly. Gerald was the CEO of the construction firm where Peter had worked before his downfall. Ruthless and manipulative, Gerald was notorious for exploiting employees, falsifying contracts, and hiding his wealth in offshore accounts. He was the architect of Peter's ruin. One seemingly ordinary day, as Peter rummaged through trash bins for something to eat, a kind woman with a warm smile handed him a lottery ticket. "Here, today might just be your lucky day," she said before disappearing into the crowd. Peter accepted it with a timid smile, never imagining that this small gesture would change his life forever. The days after Peter received the lottery ticket were a blur of hope and doubt. He tucked the ticket deep into his coat pocket, unsure if he should even bother checking the numbers. The idea of winning seemed as distant as his former life, when he had a steady job, a loving family, and a future. Peter's first reaction was disbelief, followed quickly by fear. What would he do with the money? Where would he even begin? In his years on the street, he had seen countless stories of windfalls gone wrong. He knew he needed a plan, and he knew that if anyone could help him, it would be the one person who had stuck by him during his darkest days, Marcus, a fellow homeless man who had once been a financial advisor. Marcus was a sharp, wiry man in his 50s with graying hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. Despite his circumstances, his mind remained razor-sharp, and he had a knack for seeing through people. When Peter showed him the ticket, Marcus didn't react with envy or disbelief. He simply nodded. "We've got work to do," he said, his tone as serious as if they were back in a corporate boardroom. The first step was to claim the money discreetly. Marcus devised a plan for Peter to use an anonymous trust to protect his identity. Together, they went to a legal aid office where a sympathetic lawyer, intrigued by their story, agreed to help. Within days, Peter had access to his newfound wealth without attracting the attention of the press or people like Gerald Hawkins, who might have taken advantage of him. With his finances secured, Peter turned his thoughts to his daughter, Emily. She was now living in a suburban home with her mother and stepfather, a wealthy businessman who had always dismissed Peter as a failure. He knew he couldn't just show up on their doorstep with promises of wealth. He needed to prove he had changed. Meanwhile, Gerald Hawkins remained oblivious to Peter's sudden fortune. He was too busy finalizing a fraudulent deal that would bankrupt hundreds of families. Gerald's empire, built on deceit and exploitation, was on the verge of expanding into a new real estate venture. What he didn't know was that Peter was now in a position to strike back, not just for himself, but for everyone Gerald had wronged. Peter decided to start small. He used part of his fortune to rent a small apartment and buy new clothes, gradually building a new version of himself. Then he began researching Gerald's company, uncovering documents that exposed years of fraud. Marcus, with his financial expertise, helped Peter compile a case so airtight it could bring Gerald to his knees. Peter also used his money to start a foundation for the homeless. He funded shelters, job training programs, and addiction recovery centers. The media quickly picked up on the story of a mysterious philanthropist helping New York's forgotten population. Though Peter remained anonymous, his actions sent ripples through the city and eventually caught the attention of Gerald Hawkins. Gerald's curiosity turned to paranoia as he noticed subtle changes in the city. Former employees he had exploited were suddenly speaking out. Shelters he had underfunded were now thriving. And then came the letter. a formal notice of investigation into his company's finances. Attached was a list of charges that could ruin him. Peter's plan to dismantle Gerald Hawkins' empire was meticulous and strategic, but it was not without risks. Despite the newfound comfort of his small apartment and the resources at his disposal, Peter felt the weight of every decision he made. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for the countless people Gerald had left broken in his wake. The first strike came quietly. Peter, with Marcus's guidance, anonymously leaked key documents to a journalist at a prominent New York newspaper. The files detailed Gerald's offshore accounts, fraudulent contracts, and the underhanded tactics he used to secure lucrative city deals. Within days, the story was front-page news, and Gerald's name became synonymous with corruption. As the media frenzy grew, Gerald scrambled to contain the damage. He issued public statements denying the accusations and hired a team of high-powered lawyers to discredit the claims. But Peter was ready for this. Using his foundation as a shield, he launched a second wave of attacks, supporting whistleblowers from within Gerald's company to come forward. These employees, emboldened by the media coverage, began sharing their own stories of exploitation and deceit. Among them was Linda Carter, a former accountant who had worked for Gerald for over a decade. Linda had been forced out of the company after refusing to falsify records. Now, with Peter's backing, she was ready to testify. Her story not only added credibility to the accusations, but also revealed the extent of Gerald's manipulation. But Gerald wasn't a man to go down without a fight. As the investigation intensified, he began digging into the mysterious benefactor funding the homeless initiatives and whistleblower campaigns. His private investigators uncovered hints of Peter's involvement, and Gerald realized the man he thought he had destroyed was back and far more dangerous than before. Enraged, Gerald made his move. One cold evening, as Peter returned to his apartment, he found the door slightly ajar. Inside, his belongings had been ransacked, and a message was scrawled on the wall: "Stay in your place." Peter knew immediately that Gerald was behind it. Marcus urged Peter to go to the police, but Peter refused. This wasn't just about justice anymore, it was personal. Gerald had taken everything from him, and now he was trying to intimidate him back into submission. For Peter, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. Peter escalated his efforts. He organized a press conference through his foundation, where Linda and other former employees shared their stories publicly. The event attracted massive attention, further tarnishing Gerald's reputation. Meanwhile, Marcus continued digging into Gerald's financial records, uncovering evidence of bribery that implicated several high-ranking officials. As the walls closed in, Gerald made one last desperate move. He attempted to bribe key witnesses, offering them vast sums of money to retract their statements. When that failed, he resorted to threats, sending anonymous messages to Linda and others involved. But Peter, anticipating Gerald's tactics, had already arranged for their safety. The turning point came when Marcus uncovered a pivotal piece of evidence, a signed document linking Gerald directly to a city council member who had approved illegal permits for his projects. The document was a smoking gun, and Peter knew it would be enough to bring Gerald to trial. The stage was set for a showdown. Peter filed the evidence with federal prosecutors, ensuring Gerald couldn't use his influence to quash the investigation. Within days, Gerald was arrested on charges of fraud, bribery, and tax evasion. News of his arrest spread like wildfire, marking the fall of a man who had once seemed untouchable. But Peter wasn't done yet. This wasn't just about bringing Gerald to justice. It was about showing Emily, his daughter, that he could rebuild his life with integrity and strength. With Gerald Hawkins behind bars, the first chapter of Peter's revenge was complete. But this wasn't the end of his journey, it was merely the beginning of a more profound transformation. As Peter's foundation gained recognition, people from across the city began reaching out, inspired by the anonymous benefactor who had taken down one of the most corrupt businessmen in New York. One of these people was Anna Morales, a young social worker who ran a shelter in the Bronx. Anna's shelter had narrowly avoided closure thanks to an unexpected donation from Peter's foundation. Intrigued by the man's story, she reached out, hoping to meet the person behind the generosity. What began as a professional conversation turned into a personal connection, with Anna encouraging Peter to speak more openly about his struggles and dreams. Meanwhile, Peter's relationship with Marcus deepened. Though they had started as allies with a shared purpose, Marcus's past as a financial advisor began to resurface. He revealed to Peter that his own downfall had come from a single mistake, a desperate act of embezzlement to pay for his wife's medical bills. The confession initially strained their friendship, but Peter realized that Marcus, like him, was seeking redemption. To help Marcus rebuild his life, Peter offered him a position managing the foundation's finances. Marcus hesitated, afraid of repeating past mistakes, but Peter reassured him. "We've both been at the bottom," he said. "Now it's our chance to do something meaningful." As Peter worked to expand the foundation's impact, he faced a new challenge, reconnecting with his daughter, Emily. He had learned through a mutual acquaintance that Emily's mother, Karen, and her new husband had been reluctant to let Emily know about Peter's circumstances. Karen had always seen Peter as a failure, and her new husband, a controlling and arrogant man, was determined to erase Peter from Emily's life entirely. Peter decided it was time to confront them. With Anna's support, he arranged a meeting with Karen at a neutral location, bringing with him evidence of his progress, his foundation's success, his new apartment, and proof that he had turned his life around. Karen was skeptical, but the mention of Emily softened her stance. "Emily still keeps your picture by her bed," Karen admitted reluctantly. "She asks about you sometimes." While Peter made strides toward rebuilding his relationship with Emily, Gerald was far from defeated. From his prison cell, Gerald began orchestrating a counterattack. Using his remaining influence, he reached out to allies who owed him favors, attempting to discredit Peter's foundation. Rumors spread that the foundation's funds were being mismanaged, threatening to undo the goodwill Peter had worked so hard to build. Peter, anticipating such a move, responded by holding a public audit of the foundation's finances. With Marcus's expertise, they presented a flawless report, silencing critics and further solidifying the foundation's credibility. However, the incident served as a reminder that Gerald's reach extended far beyond the prison walls. The mounting tension culminated when Peter received a message from an unexpected source, one of Gerald's former business partners, Victor Crane, who had grown wary of Gerald's schemes and wanted to cut ties. Victor offered Peter additional evidence that could permanently bury Gerald's influence, but it came with a catch. Victor wanted immunity from any investigations that might implicate him. Peter faced a moral dilemma. Accepting Victor's terms meant compromising on his values, but refusing could allow Gerald to retain a foothold in the world he had tried to escape. After a long discussion with Anna and Marcus, Peter made his choice. He agreed to Victor's terms, ensuring the evidence was delivered to prosecutors while publicly distancing himself from the deal. As the pieces fell into place, Peter began to see the outlines of a future he had thought lost. The foundation was thriving, his relationship with Emily was slowly mending, and Gerald's empire was crumbling. But the most significant change was within Peter himself. A man who had once been broken now stood as a symbol of resilience and redemption. The turning point came on a gray autumn morning when Peter received a phone call that would change the course of his battle with Gerald Hawkins. The call was from Detective Sarah Connors, a persistent investigator who had been following Gerald's financial crimes for years. Sarah informed Peter that Gerald had managed to strike a deal from prison, a reduction in his sentence in exchange for cooperating in a broader investigation into corporate corruption. Peter felt a cold wave of anger wash over him. Gerald, who had ruined so many lives, might walk free sooner than expected. Worse, Sarah warned, Gerald's remaining allies were already planning to rebuild his empire. Peter realized that his fight wasn't just about justice anymore, it was about ensuring that Gerald couldn't hurt anyone else ever again. Peter knew he had to act quickly. With Marcus and Anna by his side, he launched an aggressive plan to dismantle what little power Gerald still wielded. Marcus dove deeper into Gerald's financial history, uncovering hidden accounts and naming key accomplices. Anna coordinated efforts with other social workers and activists, rallying public support for the foundation's initiatives. But Gerald wasn't sitting idle. Even from prison, he orchestrated a smear campaign against Peter's foundation, using his remaining resources to plant false stories in the media. Articles accusing Peter of embezzling the very funds he used to help others began to circulate, casting doubt on his intentions and jeopardizing his relationship with donors and supporters. Peter felt the pressure mounting. "What if we can't clear my name?" he asked Marcus one night, exhaustion lining his face. "You didn't come this far to quit now," Marcus replied. "We've faced worse." The consequences of Gerald's counterattack were immediate and brutal. Donors pulled back from the foundation, fearing association with controversy. The shelters Peter had funded struggled to stay open. Even Anna began to feel the strain, as her shelter faced new scrutiny from city regulators. In the midst of this chaos, Peter faced another personal blow. His daughter, Emily, began to withdraw after hearing whispers about her father's alleged misdeeds. "Mom said I shouldn't trust you," she said during one of their rare visits. Peter's heart broke, but he resolved to prove his worth to her, no matter how long it took. Peter decided it was time to fight back, not just against Gerald, but against the fear and doubt that had plagued him for years. With Marcus's help, he organized a live-streamed press conference. Standing before a modest podium, Peter laid bare his story: the betrayal that had left him homeless, the strangers who had helped him rebuild, and the foundation he had created to give others the same chance. "To those who question my integrity, I invite you to see the work we've done," Peter said, his voice steady. "This foundation isn't about me, it's about the people who deserve a second chance." The honesty of his speech struck a chord with viewers. Donations began to trickle back in, and public sentiment shifted in his favor. But Peter knew this wasn't enough. To truly end Gerald's influence, he needed to expose every lie and crime the man had committed. Peter's breakthrough came when Marcus unearthed evidence that Gerald's deal with prosecutors was based on fabricated information. The documents showed that Gerald had framed a rival businessman to secure his reduced sentence. Armed with this revelation, Peter approached Detective Sarah Connors, who reluctantly reopened the case. As the investigation deepened, Gerald's house of cards began to crumble. His remaining allies turned on him to save themselves, providing damning testimony. The media, once skeptical of Peter, now championed his cause, painting Gerald as a manipulative criminal who preyed on the vulnerable. With Gerald finally cornered, Peter turned his attention to rebuilding his life. He reconnected with Corinne and Emily, this time with proof of his transformation. Corinne, seeing Peter's determination, allowed Emily to spend more time with him. Slowly, father and daughter began to rebuild their bond, sharing walks in the park and conversations about her dreams. Emily's laughter, once a distant memory, became a source of strength for Peter. Peter's foundation flourished as well. With Marcus as his trusted advisor and Anna as his partner in outreach, they expanded their efforts across the city. New shelters opened, and job training programs helped hundreds of people find stability. Peter no longer saw himself as the man who had lost everything. He was now a symbol of resilience and hope. And though he had won his battle against Gerald, he understood that the fight for justice and dignity was ongoing. One evening, as Peter stood on the rooftop of his modest apartment building, looking out at the glittering skyline of New York, he felt a sense of peace. He had faced his demons, rebuilt his life, and found a purpose greater than himself. As Peter's foundation flourished and his life began to stabilize, he thought his battle with Gerald Hawkins was over. But one fateful morning, a news report shook him to his core. Gerald had escaped custody during a routine transfer. The city buzzed with speculation about his whereabouts. For Peter, this wasn't just another headline, it was a reminder that unfinished business had a way of resurfacing. The tension escalated when Peter received an ominous letter slipped under his apartment door. Written in Gerald's sharp, precise handwriting, it read, "I'm not finished with you. Everything you've built, I'll tear down. Watch your back." Peter immediately called Marcus and Anna, who urged him to involve the police. Detective Sarah Connors was informed and placed Peter under surveillance. But Peter knew Gerald wouldn't strike directly. His tactics had always been more insidious. True to form, reports soon surfaced of Gerald reaching out to former associates, trying to rebuild his empire from the shadows. Peter decided he couldn't wait for the authorities to act. With Marcus's help, he began tracking Gerald's movements, using a network of contacts built during his years on the streets. Every lead pointed to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, where Gerald was reportedly hiding and plotting his next move. Peter made the bold decision to confront Gerald himself. Equipped with a hidden recording device and accompanied by Marcus for backup, he entered the warehouse late one night. Inside, the air was thick with dust and tension. Gerald was waiting, his once polished demeanor replaced by a dangerous edge. "What a reunion," Gerald sneered. The homeless man turned hero. "Did you really think you could destroy me?" Peter stood his ground. "This isn't about me anymore, Gerald. This is about every life you've ruined. You can't keep running." The confrontation escalated as Gerald revealed his plan to undermine the Foundation and regain control of his financial empire. But Gerald's arrogance blinded him to Peter's strategy. While Gerald gloated, Peter's recording device captured every word. Suddenly, the sound of sirens pierced the air. Detective Connors and her team stormed the warehouse, having been tipped off by Marcus. Gerald tried to flee, but this time there was no escape. He was arrested once more, and the recording Peter had made provided the evidence needed to solidify his conviction. As Gerald was led away in handcuffs, he turned to Peter, his face twisted with hatred. "You think you've won. You'll always be the man who lost everything." Peter watched him go, feeling a strange mix of triumph and pity. Gerald's words no longer had power over him. With Gerald finally defeated, Peter focused fully on his foundation and his family. The media hailed him as a hero, but Peter remained humble. He continued his work quietly, ensuring the Foundation's mission stayed true to its roots, giving people a chance. His relationship with Emily blossomed as well. One sunny afternoon, as they strolled through Central Park, Emily turned to him and said, "I'm proud of you, Dad." Those simple words meant more to Peter than any victory over Gerald ever could. Peter's journey from homelessness to redemption had transformed him into a symbol of resilience and hope. The Foundation grew beyond his wildest dreams, helping thousands of people rebuild their lives. Marcus became a respected financial advisor once again, while Anna expanded her outreach programs, touching lives across the city. Despite his success, Peter remained grounded. He often visited shelters and spoke with those still struggling, reminding them that change was possible. His story became a beacon of hope for those who had lost their way. Years later, on the anniversary of his first lottery win, Peter sat in his modest office, now filled with photos of the people his foundation had helped. Emily, now a young adult, walked in holding a cake with a single candle. "Make a wish," she said with a grin. Peter closed his eyes and smiled. He didn't need to wish for anything anymore. For the first time in years, his life felt complete.